Great pleasure and great honor to be able to welcome to this threat briefing a man who I believe takes as seriously as anyone in public office the threats to our country, specifically to our homeland. And that's a good thing because he is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. And we would expect nothing less of him, but often we have gotten considerably less than that from United States senators, I'm sorry to say, having served as a staffer in there for some years. Ron Johnson is, of course, from Wisconsin. He was first elected to the Senate in 2010. He describes himself as a businessman. I like to think he took to heart the advice that Dustin Hoffman got in The Graduate, plastics, which he succeeded at handsomely. But fortunately for all of us, he did come into public life and with a sense that there was a need for somebody who could bring a businessman's acumen to the challenge of making less of a mess out of the swamp. We are honored to have him here to talk a bit about China and to share with us his thoughts on the sorts of things that we've been talking about throughout the day, and that I know he has been giving a lot of thought to in his present capacity, also as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's, as I say, with great appreciation that I say welcome to you, Senator Johnson.
Well, thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. It's interesting you mentioned my business background because that's really what I wanted to start out with, is give you a business person's perspective of China and then kind of move you through kind of what I've experienced as a United States Senator and our current situation. So just a quick little background. I'm an accountant by educational background, ran a plastics manufacturing business. So we extruded plastic sheet for medical device manufacturing, different printing applications. We actually exported to China for probably the last 20 years. Not a huge percentage of our business, but significant enough that there were two, I'll call them opportunities, but also kind of pressure points. First thing, when you're exporting product to significant customers overseas, one of the first things those customers want you to do is manufacture close to them. Oh, it's a huge advantage America has. We're the world's largest customer, which means manufacturers want to manufacture here. But that's kind of the pressure that starts being applied when you start exporting to a country, and we had significant enough business into China. Two different times we seriously considered it. I always rejected it. I know the U.S. patent system is bad enough at protecting your secrets, and you spend more money defending patents than you actually make off the things. So generally our technology I protected just with trade secrets. And I knew if we set up manufacturing over in China, we would lose that technology. So somebody else would understand what our little secret sauce was, and it just was never worth it to me. We somehow convinced our customers to continue to export from the States to service those accounts. Now, it was very interesting how unbelievably professional the Chinese development corporations, those individuals that were really attracting American businesses, how unbelievably professional they were. How unbelievably protective they were of China's interests. You can't buy land there, you can just lease it for a certain period of time. You obviously do need Chinese partners. I have less sympathy now moving forward when when we talk about IP theft of those types of arrangements. I mean, those are businesses from America, from around the world, that decided they want access to a 1.4 billion person market. And just like I made the decision not to give up my intellectual property, they make the decision to give their intellectual property. So again, I'm far less critical of China in terms of developing those types of rules and regulations, although let's face it, they are contrary to the World Trading Organization, and we do need to bring them into compliance. And that's certainly what the Trump administration is trying to do. Completely support their efforts that way. What is going to be far more difficult, and what I simply do not and we should not tolerate, is their outright theft, the cyber theft, the industrial espionage of our industrial and military secrets. completely intolerable. Now, it's pretty hard to govern that or control that through trade agreements. They don't even admit to it. Our first line of defense, by the way, for example, on cyber attacks, is just the knowledge that it's occurring. The 2014 report by Mandy, and I thought was just a breakthrough account. Just the knowledge of cyber intrusion, cyber attacks is again, our first line of defense. So one recommendation for U.S. government policy is quit keeping so many things secret. We overclassify way too much information, where the private sector, government, we need to understand these things so we can protect ourselves against them. Now, going back to my business career, one book that I read repeatedly. Again, I wasn't a Fortune 500 company. I was a massive manufacturer. I'd consider myself a medium-sized manufacturer in a specialty niche business. So one book I started reading, and I'd reread it a number of times, was Sun Tzu's Art of War. Really a good book in terms of putting your mind and thought process. I mean, you're a little guy. You're trying to, maybe replace a bigger guy in one of the accounts. Tells you how to do it. Know your adversary. Try and win the war without ever fighting a battle. I read that repeatedly, and where that comes into play now is having gone to China as part of a congressional delegation, having met Michael Pillsbury, having read his book, can't remember whether he did it before or after, you really do understand that the Chinese government, they've been employing Sun Tzu's Art of War for millennia, and they still are. It's the exact same approach. And America has to wake up to that. Michael Pillsbury in his book points out, and I would say China's made an error. They got too arrogant, and they've shown us the size of their cauldron. We know what they're up to now. And so the West has to recognize that. I wish, just as I wish Russia was no more than a friendly rival, I wish we could say the same thing about China, but I don't believe that. And I think more and more policymakers who had the hope and the belief that by opening up our markets to China's goods and welcoming them into the WTO, our faith in a free market competitive system and in democracy, that once prosperity started taking hold in China, that their people would demand democracy and pluralism, but that hasn't been the case. And there's no way that anybody can look at China today and say that their actions are benign. There is no reason whatsoever for China to militarize the South Sea Islands. China 2025, I mean, what we're looking at is what they've done to the steel industry, produce grotesque levels of overcapacity. And by the way, as a customer of steel, you love it, but it's not good for steel industries throughout the world. They'll do the same thing to their 10 targeted industries in China 2025. Their Belt and Road Initiative is not a benign effort. And I think more and more countries that do that devil or that deal with the deal in terms of getting
it's okay.
Okay, but in terms of getting those loans with all the, and I wouldn't even call them strings, with ropes attached to them. Again, the exposure of those arrangements, how those long-term are not good for the autonomy of those nations, we need to highlight that. But first and foremost, we need to recognize what China represents, the threat they represent to us. And then my final comments, I just want to talk about, as Chairman of Homeland Security, I'm a business guy, so the first thing I did is develop a mission statement for our committee. It's pretty simple: to enhance the economic and national security of America. That's simple. You'll notice I put economic before national, because it comes first. So what is the best thing we can do to counter China and Russia's malign intent, their adversarial competition with us? Well, have a strong economy. So we need to do what we've been doing under this administration. We stopped adding to the regulatory burden, which gives businesses at least a 4-year pause. They're not looking over the shoulder. Okay, what new regulation am I going to have to comply with that I'm going to have to hire compliance officers to comply with that might put me out of business? They can concentrate on producing better products and better services at a lower cost. That's what we want businesses to do. Toss in a more competitive tax system, and all of a sudden, we're not at the new normal that Obama talked about, a 2% growth rate. We're achieving 3%. Now, we do need to get the trade wars concluded. My own preference would have been to have a unified world demand China behave. But I support President Trump's, strong desire to get China to adhere to world norms, trading norms, to try and get them to stop stealing our stuff, at least acknowledge it, and open up their markets as open as ours are to their products, that they open their markets up to ours. So again, we have to have that strong economy. We have to rebuild our military. How many times have we seen the cycle? Jimmy Carter howls out our military. Ronald Reagan has to build it up. Bill Clinton, the end of history, right? I mean, there's never going to be any conflict. Howls out our military. George Bush has to build it back up. Barack Obama howls out our military, and we're right back in that same type of cycle. The world is, if you're not noticing, is a pretty dangerous place. And again, we are in a geopolitical competition, and China is our primary rival. And that is what I appreciate about this group. You're recognizing that. You're raising the profile. You're not keeping it secret. You're showing this is what we need to be concerned about. Let's react. But again, the solution is let's make sure that we have a strong economy, that we do the right things here. Don't listen to the siren songs of the Bernie Sanders of the world. Okay? The socialists. If you can't take a look at Venezuela and say, the socialism is not such a good idea, or Cuba, or the former Soviet Union, and take a look at, what has made a country as prosperous as America is a regulated, free market capitalist system that has and by the way, I lied, I've got one other point to make. The advantages versus disadvantages of our system versus China's. Our big advantage is that free market capitalism, which isn't a perfect model using Adam Smith's invisible hand of capital allocation, but it is the best and most efficient allocator of capital ever devised by humankind. I doubt that China really went out to create that expanded capacity in steel. It's not necessarily good for them, but they don't have the market signals. And so they blew it. So that's the one huge advantage we have, is this free market capital system that allocates capital in a more efficient way, plus freedom and liberty that allows people to innovate and aspire and realize their dreams. What we have going against us is we are increasingly shorter-term thinking. Take a look at Fortune 500 companies, all about quarterly results. Take a look at our news cycle. It is instantaneous. Yesterday's headline is tomorrow's old news, and we got a new headline moving forward. And our government, listen, democracy is messy. It's a good thing that we churn administrations. We don't have presidents for life. But that also puts us at a disadvantage to a meritocracy that's a dictatorship, where you have some of the smartest people out of a 1.4, 1.5 billion population pool. The smartest people rise to the top. They're in power for a long time. They have that Sun Tzu's Arts of War strategy. They develop these strategies, and they have many years to carry them out, versus our very messy political system that is increasingly short-term thinking, and we get all balled up. For example, do Putin's work for him is in terms of the whole Russian collusion, and we're seeing that play out continuing today. So again, we have the greatest country in the history of mankind. We have the best economic model. It is the best system of democracy. But when it comes to strategic long-term thinking against a powerful economic rival in China, we got to get our act together. We need to think strategically. We need to have that strategy carried, first of all, known and carried out administration after administration. And we've done that on the Monroe Doctrine, the Truman Doctrine. There are times we've accomplished that. We have to re-embrace that kind of strategic thinking long term. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you've got. There's one right there.
Are there any questions? Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Josh Glancy from the Times of London. As you probably know, Britain last week said it was going to accept limited Huawei involvement in its 5G network. And it also said that it was going to go out and pitch for Belt and Road contracts in June with China. So I was just wondering if I could gather your response to that. Britain is a very strong security ally of the United States.
Well, first of all, Britain, we do have that special relationship. it is the Western democracies. I mean, it is our values, it's our belief in individual liberty and freedom. That is the governing model that we want the rest of the world to embrace. And so we got to hang together. We've got to be allied. We have to recognize both the economic and national security threat of allowing China to dominate the 5G world and utilize, telecommunication equipment like in Huawei. That represents a serious national security threat. There is nothing you can do. There's no way to ameliorate that if you buy and put that equipment into your telecommunication system. So the U.S. will push back strongly, whether it's against Germany, whether it's against the U.K. That is just to me, a no-brainer in terms of what, as allies and friends, we should not be doing. We should not be promoting both economically, but also for national security interests, China's growing presence in 5G and some of these growing technological areas.
Are you surprised or disappointed to see Britain make those decisions?
Disappointed, I think, would probably be the best way to state it.
Other questions? Alex.
Senator, I was Alan Zhang. I was a president of Sound of Hope, a Chinese radio media. So earlier I was talking about, I was one of the speakers. I do identify an issue that we have, which is Chinese government's, their information war is pushing hard into our backyard. Okay, I was talking about the Phoenix TV buying a mega radio in Southern California. This company has $600 million in revenue. It can dwarf any competition, Chinese American media. So all our defense, our operation, our program stay with State Department. The GEC, Global Engagement Center, and the DRL, they have all the funding. I feel that we are undefended in terms of guarding our own land here. And I think Homeland Security needs to have a program like that. Otherwise, they're going to turn these 5 million Chinese Americans into a problem, into a liability. They should be our asset. And this has to be dealt with. Otherwise, we are very, very difficult. In the front line, we work 16, 18 hours a day. Literally, I'm not making things up. We don't have support. And, I really wish to raise that issue.
Alan, I don't think the senator was here when you spoke, but just say a word about what Phoenix is doing to try to circumvent the restrictions on foreign ownership of broadcasting in America.
Yeah, FCC has a rule. No foreign company can buy 20% of U.S. radio. So Phoenix, very simple, find a shell company led by U.S. citizen, and then go to Mexico, buy a gigantic station, border blaster that can cover entire Southern California. And then we have basically, we have our attorney fighting with them in front of FCC. We cannot even afford the attorney fee, to be honest. But we have to fight it. I went to FBI. They said if it's not criminal, we don't get into it. FBI can do a check and find out the funding. Very simple. FBI can pin them down. But it's not their job description. And all the program and the funding I stayed with the State Department, and they told me that we are State Department. We only care about things outside of U.S. So we have a gap in our defense line. This information war is very, very important. Cold War is one. It is fought by military strength and economic strength, but it was won by information, by the heart. So I think we need to win that battle, and we need Homeland Security to step up.
Not to totally ruin your day, quick show of hands. Oftentimes I open up my remarks. How many people think the federal government is efficient and effective? How many think it's pretty broken, dysfunctional? Okay, there's our disadvantage right there. It's not that we don't have the economic resources to combat effectively both Russia disinformation and propaganda. I mean, you take a look at Russia, depending on whether you're talking about U.S. dollars or purchasing power parity, somewhere between $2 and $4 trillion economy. The West, we're way north of $30 trillion. We dwarf them. Now, obviously, China is a growing power. On purchasing power parity, they're actually larger than the U.S. economy on one stat I've looked at. But we have the resource to do it, but we just don't prioritize it. Part of the problem is the U.S. itself. Our government has done so many things it shouldn't be doing. I mean, we're a republic of federalized states, sovereign states. They should be doing most of the governing, and the federal government ought to be concerned about national security, border security, basic infrastructure, basic rules of interstate commerce. But when we've entered into all these other areas and have our budget burgeoning above $4 trillion a year, it completely distracts us. So no, I completely understand. I'm chairman of the European subcommittee. We've held hearings on the Russian disinformation. And right now, we are doing Putin's work for him. Now, this is a classic disinformation campaign operation of Russia against America in 2016, and they're still reaping the benefits. It's absurd. We got to get our act together. We have to understand what the threats are. And again, that's what I was talking about. We need a long-term strategy. And in the world today, it's the information age. And we need to counter the deluge of misinformation, propaganda that's coming at us, and really represents a huge threat to our country. So I completely agree with you. Yep.
Terrific. We have one over here, sir, if you would. Keith Walker, who spoke earlier as well about 5G.
Good afternoon, Senator. Keith Walker with Air Wireless. What I would like to know, is the Senate prepared and ready to take effective action to deal with the whole 5G issue and eliminate any threat to our national security that would be present if Huawei is allowed in?
So I just referred to my question that I asked about effective. No, listen, I'm not a fan of this place. I often say I'm not a real U.S. Senator. I stayed at Cowley Express last night. We did try and reform and give CFIUS a few more powers from that standpoint. I wish I could sit here and say, oh, absolutely, we got this covered. I'm not confident from that standpoint. Again, that's why I appreciate your efforts here. We do need education. I'm trying to address the border right now. I'm bringing information to the debate that people don't realize. Same thing's here. And part of the problem, and I said this in an AEI speech on the whole cybersecurity issue. Those of you that are old enough, if you might remember Gilligan's Island, I said, on this island, we're all Gilligans. There aren't many professors that know how to, produce a battery out of a coconut. And when it comes to cyber, it is unbelievably complex. And unless you're a computer science expert, you just really don't understand what all we're dealing with. We all talk 5G. Do I fully understand 5G? Not even close. I'm an accountant. I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't know what Frank's talking about with all EMP, GMD. So it's part of the problem is we are getting to that point where we are a bunch of Gilligans when it comes to the technological advances. And so, a bunch of politicians, elected officials, primarily lawyers, or former staff. I mean, those elected officials, they're trying to grapple with a $4 trillion plus budget. They're not experts on these things, and it makes it pretty difficult.
So to put it in economic terms, it is prohibitively financially beneficial on the one hand, and on the other hand, if allowed to go forward, there's going to be a bigger problem that will arise from the health costs, okay, and the food costs because of the proven and verified changes that it will make to the cellular level of not just humans, but also any living organism.
Next question.
That's a cheery thought. Well,